What is it about a story that captivates us? Is it the image that is created in our mind while we listen to a story or read a story? Or is it in fact the storyteller themselves? You see, we all remember stories because of how they make us feel. Being an animator, I work with storytellers every day. So today I'd like to take you on a journey through my life experiences, and hopefully it will inspire you to one day have the confidence to tell your own stories. Animation is sometimes referred to as the suspension of disbelief, meaning that we take an idea, a story, or a fictional character, and for a moment believe that it actually exists. We sacrifice realism and logic for the sake of enjoyment and entertainment. Be it a giant gorilla, a cute clownfish, or a fire-breathing dragon. I've had an interesting childhood. I grew up on a farm in Zimbabwe, in the Vumba Mountains, after I was adopted at the age of 5 by my aunt and uncle, Jenny and Chris Donald. This was just after my biological mother, had passed away. I drew the lucky straw, and I found myself in a wonderful family with 2 extra brothers, Michael and Alan, and an older sister, Karen. However, in 2004, my mother, Jenny Donald, was tragically killed in a car accident. The following year, my brother Alan drowned while spearfishing in Mozambique. And only last year, my sister Karen lost her battle with leukemia. Why am I telling you this, and what has it got to do with storytelling and my career? The difficulties of dealing with death and tragedy, you see, is that nobody really prepares you for it. We don't get taught it at school. So learning to focus on what's important in life and trusting in your abilities has led me to where I am today. Sharing your stories and ideas with someone is so important because when you die, unfortunately, when you die, your stories will go with you. I found out an interesting fact the other day. Did you know that there are more people alive today than have ever died? Think about that for a moment. How many untold stories are there out there that have yet to be heard? Animators like myself tend to observe natural movements of animals, insects, and of course people. And we take these references and apply them to the characters that we're working with. The beautiful surroundings I had as a child growing up in Africa was the perfect environment for me to be able to reference these behaviors. I can still remember when I was about 7 years old, peering into the undergrowth at little insects and bugs, and imagining stories of love, of battle, of gossip, and of course of fairy tales. In my mind, I could control a simple story that I would tell myself. And this, what I realized later on, was an escape from the things that I couldn't control at the time. This was my first introduction to animation, because you see, what I was doing was I was projecting my thoughts into the creatures around me. Luckily, there were no dragons around at the time. Growing up on the farm, I was also surrounded by books from an artist in Zimbabwe called Rose Rigdon. Her amazing talent and quirky outlook on the natural world through her drawings left an impression that got imprinted in my mind at a young age. At boarding school, I realized that I had a natural talent for drawing. I could draw anything to a highly realistic standard, but the more that I drew, the more frustrated I became with my art. You see, my images remained just that, a single image. I wanted them to tell a bigger story. So when I was 21 years old, my sister and I traveled overseas to the United Kingdom, and it was there that we met our biological father again. I applied for an animation course at university, and it was here that I found my passion. And finally, I could bring those stories to life. Becoming good at something requires practice. Practice makes perfect, my mother always used to say to me. She was a fantastic florist and even has an orchid named after her, the Jenny Donald orchid, She was my inspiration to push my love for storytelling and art to a much higher level. But losing her while studying at university was pretty hard. It was pretty tough. And I remember feeling so empty at the time. But I knew that I had to move forward. And she always used to say to me, you know, Jono, trust in your abilities. Never give up, because life is what you make of it. Losing my brother Alan shortly after was one of the lowest points of my life. I needed to escape from the loss and pain that I was going through at the time. And I knew that I needed to mask out what was going on behind the scenes in my personal life if I wanted to get a job. Alan spent most of his life underwater, and later on in my career, when I was animating Nemo in Disney Connect's Animal Adventures, I could escape whilst I was working in my mind to be with him. He used to always say to me, never look back, and this sparked a forward-driving force in my conscious decisions to always focus on what's in front of me. So after putting myself through university, I was invited to work at a major company in London, and thinking, being very arrogant, that I would start out as a junior animator, it turned out that I would only be making tea and coffee for everybody in a position called a runner, which, let's be honest, that's the worst name for a job ever. However, this would not deter me. I had my foot in the door. I was going to make it. And if I had to make tea and coffee to get there, then it would be the best damn cup of tea they ever made. I knew that in order to be noticed, I had to change my outlook on how I approached my job as a runner. Instead of constantly feeling unappreciated, I turned this negativity into positivity by convincing myself that I was in the right place and that if I trust in my abilities, that soon enough I'll get my job as a junior animator. However, I had been trained at university in a different software from the one that the company was using. So what was I going to do? I learned it. I learned everything that there was to learn about animation. I learned every software that I could. I decided one day to invest in myself and in my mind. And it's the best investment that I've ever made. My first big break came when the animation supervisor of the company at the time, Mark Brucking, invited me to work on a TV show called Primeval. He noticed my talent and guided me to push my animation to a much higher standard. I ended up winning an award for my work on the show, and with this newfound confidence, I used this as a platform to build on top of. Since then, I've worked on major feature films, including Avatar, Prince of Persia, Nanny McPhee, Trollhunter, just to name a few. And of course, the TV series, The Game of Thrones. I've been nominated 3 times for a Vez Award. I've worked in over 15 companies, I've taught thousands of students how to animate, and now I have my own company, Sophoria. But how did I get to work on the Game of Thrones, I hear you ask? Well, what happened was, in 2012, I was working in London at a company called Pixamondo on a movie called The Dark Tide. And obviously, I had made a great impression because the producer from that company called me a couple of years later and said, Jono, would you be interested in working with us again, in Germany this time? And I was like, okay, cool. What were we working with? And she was like, dragons. So, of course, I took the opportunity, and here I am today. Whilst working on the Game of Thrones, I spent most of my time animating Drogon. Please remember that there were other animators in the world that did work on Drogon, not just myself. But what was fantastic was that I got to specialize in his emotional responses and his behavior, rather than just flying around and breathing fire on everything that dragons are famous for. Animating a dragon is not that simple. In fact, I've often told people that I've met that it's easier to learn how to fly an aircraft, which I also know how to do, than to mathematically calculate and visualize how to distribute the weight and volume of something that you have no reference of over time. But what I find rewarding about my job is when someone says, "I can't believe it's not real," or "that looks so realistic." When we hear these words, our jobs of making you suspend your disbelief has been achieved. At this time in my career, I was really happy with where I was and what I had achieved so far. All the years of hard work had finally paid off. But this last season, though, was one of the hardest that I've ever had to work on. Halfway through, my biggest fan, my sister, called me to tell me she has leukemia. Sorry. And only 18 days later, she would pass away. By the time I came back from the funeral, I was completely devastated. I remember thinking to myself, how can I possibly maintain a positive attitude to deliver the animation that is required of the dragons, lead my team of animators, and remain professional without letting my personal life affect my ability to work, and essentially what billions of people will end up watching. I needed more than ever now to focus on what my responsibilities were and to find a way to distract myself with my work. But maintaining Drogon's mysterious, wild, yet intelligent personality was now much more difficult because I myself was struggling to maintain my own image. I knew I needed to constantly balance the grief with motivation to succeed. Remember that animators tend to project themselves into their characters. And in a way, I'm so grateful that I was working with such a wonderful creature as Drogon. At the time I lost my sister, instead of, let's say a cute, happy pigeon, I could nestle inside his personality. And as strange as this may sound to some of you, he helped me get through one of the hardest times in my life. With the support and guidance from my amazing, fantastic visual effects supervisor, Sven Martin, we achieved this season an amazing performance that I will always be proud of. But getting to the stage in my career was not without the support of my friends and family, especially my stepfather, Chris Donald, who created an amazing world for his children to grow up in. It's a story in itself. I've built my own dragon now. And unrestricted, I will continue to use him to animate the things that inspire me and escape with him into the childhood stories that I remember so vividly. The last part of my story has not been written yet, and neither has yours. But if I was to leave you with a little bit of advice today, it's this. If ever you find yourselves in a situation that you feel could overwhelm you emotionally, be it the loss of someone you love, not getting that job that you really wanted, or perhaps not telling someone a story that you knew that they would have liked to listen to. Whatever it is, try to distract yourselves only for a moment. In your mind, go to a place where you feel comfortable and occupy that time and space with positive thoughts. And I promise you, as time goes by, you will naturally adjust. One day, you will have the confidence to share that experience with someone else. And these valuable conversations that we share with each other are priceless especially for the multiple generations that have yet to follow us. Always try to give something back. The imprint of what people will remember you by is by how you made them feel and what you did for them. So, invest in yourselves, and above all, realize that we are only here for a brief amount of time. And that in that time that you have, try to do everything that you can to leave a lasting impression. A story worth telling. Thank you.